starting a new series. I'm really thinking this is going to challenge you, but I think it's going to encourage some people. I think there's some things that we miss in the simplicity of the gospel and the opportunity that we have with Jesus Christ. And I've called this series To Be or Not to Be. To be or not to be. That is the question. Familiar phrase. It was written sometime between 1599 and 1602. William Shakespeare wrote that phrase in the now famous story, The Tragedy of Hamlet, or what we know it is as Hamlet. And the character Hamlet is considering to be or not to be alive. He's considering taking his own life. He's considering life in all its complexities. And I think Christians go through this question on a daily basis. I think actually consider this question multiple times in a day. To be or not to be. Taking my life in my own hands or giving my life to God. To be or not to be in the presence of God. To invite Him into what's going on in my life. So we're going to start this series, To Be or Not to Be, and we're going to look at the teachings of Jesus in its simplicity, but also in the aspect of complexity. And I think it's going to be powerful, and I think it's going to bless you. Ultimately, to be or not to be in His presence is the question, I believe, of all ages. Am I going to allow God to do what only God can do in my life? To be or not to be in that place? Jesus' ministry had begun to expand. He was drawing in, calling in His disciples, and He's getting ready to go into His public ministry. He's about 30 years of age at this point. Here's some of the things that were occurring. Matthew 4:23 through 25, it says, "And when He went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction among the people." Verse 24, "So His fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought Him all the sick, those afflicted with various diseases and pains, those oppressed by demons, those having seizures and paralytics, and He healed them. And great crowds followed Him from Galilee and the Decapolis, and from Jerusalem and Judea, and from beyond the Jordan." In other words, Jesus had become truly famous. His words, now His actions, His ministry, people were hearing. There was a buzz, this sizzle through the crowds. Have you heard about Jesus? And they're bringing everyone who is afflicted. It's exciting, but at the same time, among them are the sick, among them are the demon-possessed, among them are the hurting. But Jesus is touching every single need, and healings are occurring, and His words are igniting an encouragement and a fire in people's hearts. The same thing that was going on then, I believe, is available to us now, the ministry and power of Jesus Christ. He makes that available. That's what was happening. That's what was going on at that time. And He not only talked this good talk, gospel message, but He walked it. It had a physical manifestation in the crowds of what Jesus had to offer. I'm going to ask you a question over and over today, is how close do you want to be to Jesus? How close do you want to be to Jesus? Because there's a lot of things happen the closer you get to Jesus. Most Christians would answer that question very quickly, and they would say, I want to be as close to Jesus as I can be. Okay? All right. A lot of Christians would say, I want to be closer to Him than I am now. Okay? But there's a lot of things that occur the closer I get to Jesus, to be or not to be close to Jesus. So the next chapter in the Gospel of Matthew, we know it leading into what was called the Sermon on the Mount. And the Gospels record various perspectives of this. The Gospel of Luke records, a lot of scholars believe that it's pieces of His messages, pieces of His sermons. And in the Gospel of Matthew, it's referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. In the Gospel of Luke, it's referred to as the Sermon on the Plains. And so we're going to go into this aspect of the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, verse 1 and 2 says, seeing the crowds. He sees all this. He went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them. And this is the setup for what we know as the Sermon on the Mount. He begins to speak to those that are closest to him. There's a lot going on here. When we're going to take these two verses in Matthew 5, 1 and 2 today, and we're going to go through this. A lot happening here, and if we take a little bit of time, I think it's going to give us some insight. It's going to give some insight to those that may be here today, and it's a little dry between you and Jesus right now. There's a little bit of a gap. There's a little bit of a valley. There's a separation. You feel the distance in the relationship. And then there's going to be, for some, you just kind of been really struggling. I wish things were the way they were. The way things are, I don't like. I wish we could go back. I wish things would, and you have some great memories, and there's some great times, and this is going to challenge you. I pray that it ministers to us all. You ever feel lost in the crowd? You ever feel lost? You get into a big room, maybe you come in, sometimes people will walk into the foyer, or they walk even into here, and for some of you, this may be your first time, we want to welcome you, but you come in and you're just kind of lost in the crowd, like, where do I fit? How do I, when a crowd is up, when a crowd is moving, when a crowd is engaging, there's a frenzy, there's maybe an excitement, but sometimes you can get lost in the crowd. I think it's, we all experience that, but a crowd has a flow to it. It has a dynamic to it. Matthew 5:1 says, seeing the crowds, what we call maybe a revival. I mean, all this healing has gone on. All these miracles have occurred. All this deliverance has happened. It says Jesus sees the crowds, and he went up on the mountain. That's going to become key today. He went up on the mountain. He sees all these good things. He sees all this what we would deem as revival going on, and he sees it, and he goes to the mountain. If you're writing notes, taking notes, it's on the back of the bulletin that you got. To be or not to be with Jesus may cause a choice between the masses or the mountain. It may cause a choice between the masses or the mountain. No doubt Jesus had ministered in the masses, but now he sees all of this, all these good things, and he goes to the mountain. That stood out to me. That was something I'm like, Lord, there's something here I need to lead into. There's something here that I think you're wanting to say to us here. Why did you do that? Why did you see all these good things and you didn't just stay in the midst of it? You saw the crowd and you went to the mountain. Lord, you're doing something. I think there's a lot of things that are going on here, but I think the Lord wants to take us to the mountain on this. Notice he didn't go on vacation. He didn't go to an easy place. It didn't say Jesus saw the crowds and he went to a spa. It didn't say, oh, he recognized the need for a massage, and so he went to a mountain. Well, that's a climb. That's a difficulty. He went to the mountain. The mountain's a separate from the masses. The masses don't always go to the mountain. That's a hard place. That's a difficult place. It can be a lonely place, maybe an isolated. There's not a lot of activity happening on the mountain. It's a place of focus. It's a place of solace. Jesus saw the crowd, and he went to the mountain. The question again, how close do you want to be to Jesus? Matthew 5:1, seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down. So we get this picture. Jesus has gone to the mountain. He sees the crowds. He goes to the mountain, and he sits down. He stops. He sits down. To be or not to be with Jesus, write this down, may create questions to climb or endure for an encounter. Questions to climb or endure for an encounter. Has Jesus ever in your life done something and you say, why are you doing that? Lord, all this great was going on and now it just seems like things are falling apart. Like it seems like, where'd you go, Lord? Anybody ever experienced that? God, why do we have to do it this way? Why would you, here's the big one, why would you allow that? It was going so well. Did you not see what was happening in the masses? Jesus saw the crowd. He went to the mountain. And he sat down. Where'd you go, Lord? There was a choice here. God, I don't want to climb. I don't like climbing. That's hard. That's difficult. Why didn't you just stay here and do what you were going to do? But what about if you've got something more for me and I can't get it here and I got to get it there and maybe I got to endure something? Lord, maybe there's an encounter here. Well, there was. It's exactly what was going on. It's an encounter. In other words, what Jesus did in the crowds was done. He saw the crowds. What Jesus was doing would only be experienced from another vantage point. At this point, it would be after a climb. What he was doing was going to require a climb beyond the common grasp and in the moment with him. Well, I want to be close to Jesus, and Jesus saw this, but he went this way. Why did he go this way? And you could get caught in questioning here, or you could just go with him there. That's what we see happening here. Matthew 5, 1 and 2, it says, seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, oh, I love this, his disciples came to him. His disciples came to him. Who came to him? These are those that are closest to him. Those that were closest to him came to him. Sometimes in our mind, in the picture, we get in the Gospel of Matthew is the Sermon on the Mount. In the Gospel of Luke, it refers to the Sermon on the Plain. And Luke tends to be, scholars tend to believe that these were elements of some of Jesus' different messages put together. In Matthew, it's more isolated into the Sermon on the Mount, where he goes to the mountain and he begins to teach. He begins to unveil his message, the gospel, to those that were closest to him. See, the crowd on the mountain was different than the crowd in the valley. The crowd on the mountain was different than the crowd in the valley. And you got to get this. The crowd in the valley saw the miracles, but the crowd on the mountain experienced the one who did the miracles. I realize there's a fine line there, but there's something about when you're in a setting like this and you see brother so-and-so and sister so-and-so and they get touched by the Lord. I've been healed. I've been delivered. God's given me peace. He's given me direction. I feel his power. And you get that and you see that and you experience that. But what about those times when it's just you and God and he's ministering to you? He's not ministering through you. He's not ministering to somebody else. He's ministering to you. So the crowd in the valley is different than the crowd on the mountain. Those that were closest to him made the climb. Those that were closest to him had answered the question, how close do you want to be with Jesus? Even if it means a climb, I'm going to be with Jesus because he's got more for me. He's got something for me. It's personal, what he has for me. Matthew 5, 1 and 2 says, seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them. There's a lot more going on here. There was a revival happening. It seems like, God's doing amazing things, but he had something very specific for those that were closest to him. He needed to include them in some insight that they're not going to get with the masses. They're going to have to go to the mountain. There's going to have to be a place of focus. There's going to have to be a place of solace. There's going to have to be a Jesus and them time. And he teaches them. He goes to the mountain. He sees all the crowds. He doesn't condemn it. Obviously, there was great things going on. He sees all that. He goes to the mountain. He sits down. Those closest to him followed. He opened his mouth and he spoke. I believe God wants to speak to us specifically. The same Jesus that day that spoke to his disciples, his closest followers, is the same Jesus today that wants to speak specifically to us. But we got to have some mountain time with him, church. Got to have some mountain time. Well, Lord, I just really would rather just bathe in the presence of the crowd and the corporate and all that. It's great. It's awesome. But we still got to go to the mountain with him. Still got to go to the mountain, church. What if you were one that didn't go to the mountain? What if you were one that just stayed back? Maybe you had some great excuses. You had heard and maybe seen some of the miracles, but going up on the mountain was a little out of your comfort zone. I mean, we got a lot of people that tend to make excuses like that. That's the deep end. I don't go to the deep end. I'm content with just seeing what Jesus can do instead of experiencing what he can do. So we can't grow content there because we got a mountain experience that gives us a whole different perspective of anything and everything we're going to encounter. Maybe you were tired. You didn't go to the mountain. You're tired. You just didn't make much sense at the time. Maybe another time, but not today. My ankles hurt. My back's sore. I'm tired. Do you realize what kind of week I've had? And now we're going to go to a mountain? You'd seen what Jesus had to offer. You'd seen him work in others' lives. You were close to his workings. What's the big deal right now? The crowds that follow Jesus, I think, are no different than the crowds that follow him today sometimes. Crowds that follow Jesus, I want to see Jesus work. I want to see revival. I want to experience revival. It's all good things. But I can tell you, he's got more than revival for us. He's got a mountain experience for us that if we'll follow him, he's going to stop, and he's going to turn, and he's going to speak, and he's going to teach you things you can't get down in the valley. He's going to teach you things that only come in that focused, solace, lonely place with him. And your eyes will open and your heart will be receptive to things that there's no other way to do in the busyness and craziness of the crowd. No pastor can do it for you. No church can do it for you. There's some things that are going to require you climbing towards where Jesus wants to take you. There's going to be some things that will require a discipline. To be or not to be with Jesus may compel you to let go of the past to experience his presence. To be or not to be with Jesus may compel you to let go of the past to experience his presence. What he did yesterday is not what he's going to do today. He's moving on, but he's being specific, and it will all come about, and it will all make sense. There are those who want to question what Jesus has to say, and there's those that want to hear what Jesus has to say. It's two totally different crowds. There's those that accept what Jesus has to say, and there's those that reject what Jesus has to say. I could tell you in the midst of the crowd, it's easy to be swayed one way or the other. Sometimes in the midst of the crowd, we see what God's doing in their life, and we wish we had that. What we didn't realize is that person went to the mountain to get what they got. Maybe sometimes in our minds we wish that Jesus would move in our lives the way he's moved in their lives. Why won't God do it that way? Because God's got something special and powerful for you. And maybe it will look like that, but you've never gone to the mountain to truly hear his voice. Well, I want somebody else to do it for me. There's some things that God's calling us to that we can only go and get ourselves. And he's right there, and he welcomes us, and he invites us in. I'm going to ask the musicians to come. I want to give us some extra time today. Usually at the end of a sermon, we give what we call an altar call. An altar call. I'm going to rephrase it today. I'm going to give us an opportunity for some mountain time. For some mountain time. See, some of you are here, and you think you just need God to do something in your life that what you think it should be. How you've assessed what the situation is, therefore you've assessed what the solution is. But if you go to the mountain, your perspective may change. Your whole aspect of the problem may change. And Jesus wants to speak to you, and he's got an opportunity for you. And yeah, my suggestion is this. Instead of trying to excuse away, instead of trying to stay where you're at, put on the hiking shoes and go to the mountain. Put on the hiking shoes and experience specifically what he has for your life.